A billionaire CEO didn't know he was a father until the woman he loved was thrown onto the street by her husband with his babies in her arms. Enjoy the story. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Julian Vance commanded his world from a throne of glass and steel, 48 floors above the ceaseless river of New York City traffic. His kingdom was Vance Industries, a global behemoth he had inherited and then sharpened into a weapon of corporate conquest. His gaze, a cool, calculating gray, swept over the holographic display shimmering in the center of his cavernous office. The final details of the Vanderbilt merger solidified, pixels aligning into numbers that represented billions of dollars and the cementing of a dynasty. It was his greatest triumph. He felt nothing. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the whisper-quiet hum of the climate control system. It was the same silence that filled his penthouse, his custom-made sports car, his life. A sterile, profound emptiness that no amount of success could fill. His phone vibrated against the polished obsidian of his desk. It was not his personal line, but the private, encrypted number known only to his family and his innermost circle. He expected it to be his sister, Serafina, with an update on the pre-merger dinner arrangements with the Vanderbilt family, a union that was as much about marriage as it was about stock prices. He was engaged to their daughter, Beatrice, a woman as impeccably crafted and emotionally distant as a museum sculpture. It was a suitable match. Serafina had assured him of it. He glanced at the unknown number on the screen, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. He was about to dismiss the call when an instinct, a ghost of some long-forgotten impulse, made him answer. "Who is this?" he asked, his voice clipped and devoid of warmth. The voice on the other end was rough, choked with a venom that felt intensely personal. "Is this Julian Vance?" "I'm asking you who is calling," Julian retorted, his patience thinning. "You don't know me. The name's Marco Rossi, the man spat. But you know my wife. Or you used to. Elena. Remember her?" Julian froze. The name was a key, unlocking a room in his memory he had sealed shut 5 years ago. Elena. The scent of rain on summer asphalt, the taste of cheap coffee shared at dawn, the sound of her laughter, the only real warmth he had ever known. It all came rushing back in a dizzying, painful flood. Before Vance Industries, before the billions and the emptiness, there had been Elena. "What is this about?" Julian's voice was different now. Tense. Human. "It's about your past coming to collect," Marco sneered. "I'm at Lenox Hill Hospital. Maternity ward. You should get down here. Your precious Elena just gave birth. To twins. And they sure as hell aren't mine." There was a pause, filled with the ragged sound of the man's breathing. "I found her little box of treasures. Your letters. Your picture. She's been lying to me this whole time. She's your problem now. All 3 of them." The line went dead. Julian stood motionless, the phone still pressed to his ear. The holographic display of the Vanderbilt merger flickered, its billions suddenly seeming like children's play money. Maternity ward. Twins. Elena. The words echoed in the silent, empty kingdom of his office, each one a hammer blow against the glass walls of the life he had so carefully constructed. He turned, his movements stiff, robotic, and walked out of the office, leaving his greatest triumph shimmering, forgotten, in the air behind him. The drive to Lenox Hill was a blur. Julian's driver, accustomed to silent, efficient trips between boardrooms and galas, navigated the roaring traffic with his usual skill, but for once Julian was not looking at the city. He was staring inward into a chasm of the past he had been forced to reopen. He remembered their breakup. It had been swift and brutal. A single text message from her phone, a week after his father's funeral. "I can't do this anymore, Julian. I've met someone else. Don't contact me again." It had shattered him. Coming on the heels of his father's death and the immense pressure of taking over the company, it had been the final blow that had forged the cold, detached man he was today. He had buried the pain under work, ambition, and an impenetrable wall of wealth. He found the maternity ward with a dreadful sense of unreality. The air smelled of antiseptic and baby powder, a combination so alien to his world it made him feel lightheaded. A nurse directed him down a corridor, her expression a mixture of curiosity and professional detachment. And then he saw them. At the far end of the hall, near the nursery window, a man was shouting. He was wiry and agitated, his face contorted in a mask of rage. A small, crumpled cardboard box lay on the floor at his feet. Standing before him, her back pressed against the wall, was Elena. She looked exhausted, pale, her hospital gown swimming on her frame. But her posture was defiant, protective. In her arms she held a tightly wrapped bundle. Another, identical bundle was in a bassinet right beside her. Julian's steps slowed. He was still 20 feet away, a ghost from another life. Marco, her husband, hadn't seen him yet. "They're not mine," Marco yelled, his voice echoing in the unnervingly quiet hall. He gestured wildly at the babies. "Look at them. They look nothing like me. She kept your letters, your picture. Take them, they're your problem now." He kicked the box on the floor, sending it skittering toward the nurse's station. He gave Elena one last look of pure hatred, then turned and stormed away, brushing past Julian without a second glance. The hall fell silent again, the only sound the soft, frantic weeping of Elena. She slid down the wall, cradling the baby in her arms, her body shaking with sobs. Julian walked forward, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the polished linoleum. He stopped in front of her. She looked up, her eyes, the same warm, deep brown he remembered, now cloudy with tears and fear. Recognition dawned, followed by a wave of shock and shame. "Julian," she whispered, her voice cracking. He couldn't speak. His gaze fell from her face to the bundle in her arms. A tiny, perfect face peeked out from the blankets. And then he saw it. The baby's eyes fluttered open, and they were staring right at him. They were not brown like Elena's. They were a clear, startling gray. His gray. The same unique shade that was a hallmark of the Vance family, the same eyes that stared back at him from the mirror every morning. He looked at the second baby in the bassinet. It too had his eyes. Then he saw the other connecting element. Around Elena's neck, resting against her collarbone, was a simple, worn silver locket. He had given it to her on their 1-year anniversary, bought from a street vendor in a moment of spontaneous joy. He had thought it lost to time, to the past he had buried. But here it was. Here she was. And here were his children. His world, which had been built on a foundation of control and logic, tilted on its axis and shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces. The Vanderbilt merger, his fiancée, his sister's incessant calls which he now noticed were lighting up his phone. All of it became meaningless noise. He was no longer Julian Vance, CEO. He was just a man, standing in a hospital corridor, looking at the ruins of his past and the impossible, undeniable truth of his future. He knelt, his knees hitting the cold floor, his world fundamentally, irrevocably shaken. He acted on autopilot, his mind a maelstrom of shock and a nascent, terrifying sense of responsibility. With a few sharp, quiet words to the head nurse and a flash of his black credit card, he had Elena and the twins moved to a private suite at the far end of the wing. It was a sterile, opulent room meant for celebrities and dignitaries, a world away from the public hallway where her life had just imploded. He ensured she had everything she needed: food, a doctor on call, and most importantly, security at the door to keep the world at bay. Especially Marco. Then he retreated. He didn't go back to his office or his penthouse. He went to his car, a silent, armored sanctuary parked in the hospital's private garage. The crumpled cardboard box Marco had kicked was on the passenger seat. He had picked it up with a shaking hand, a piece of evidence in a crime he was only just beginning to understand. He sank into the plush leather, the engine off, the only light the cold, fluorescent hum of the garage. For a long time he just sat there, trying to breathe. Finally he reached for the box. His fingers, usually so steady signing billion-dollar contracts, fumbled with the torn flap. Inside was a small stack of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. His letters. He recognized his own handwriting, the confident, sloping script of a younger, happier man. He pulled one out and read the words he had written 5 years ago. They were filled with plans, dreams, promises of a future that had never come to pass. "As soon as the funeral is over and I've dealt with my father's estate, I'm coming to you, Elena. We'll start our life. Just you and me. Promise." Beneath the letters was a photograph. A selfie, taken on a whim at a street fair. He was 25, grinning, his arm around a laughing Elena. They were soaked from a sudden downpour, but they didn't care. They looked invincible. He traced the outline of her face with his thumb, a wave of guilt so profound it was physically nauseating washing over him. He had believed she had left him. He had allowed his pride and his pain to build a fortress around his heart, and he had never once questioned the single, cruel text message that had brought their world crashing down. How could he have been so blind, so arrogant as to believe she would throw all this away for nothing? His phone buzzed again insistently. He glanced at the screen. Serafina. He ignored it. It buzzed again. Beatrice. He ignored that one, too. A third call came through. Serafina again. This time he answered, his voice a low growl. "What? Julian? Where in God's name are you?" His sister's voice was like ice chips in a crystal glass, sharp, cold, and expensive. The Vanderbilts are here. Beatrice is asking for you. You were supposed to be here an hour ago. This is not the time for one of your disappearances. This merger, this marriage, is the culmination of everything father and I have worked for. Her words, meant to chastise and control, had the opposite effect. The everything she spoke of, the deals, the alliances, the carefully curated public image, suddenly seemed like a hollow sham. It was a life built on a lie he was now forced to confront. Something's come up, he said, the words feeling inadequate. Something more important than securing the future of this company, she scoffed. Don't be ridiculous. Whatever it is, send someone else to handle it. Your place is here. I can't, he said, and the certainty in his own voice surprised him. He was looking at the photo of him and Elena, at the ghost of the man he used to be. I'm not coming, he ended the call before she could reply, the silence in the car suddenly feeling less like emptiness and more like the calm before a storm. He made another call, this one to Arthur Kensington, his head of security. Arthur was a former MI6 agent, a man of quiet efficiency and unshakable loyalty, the only person in Julian's world he trusted implicitly. Arthur, Julian said, his voice low and urgent. I have a task for you. It is of the utmost importance and requires absolute discretion. Of course, Mr. Vance, came the calm, immediate reply. I need you to find out everything you can about a woman named Elena Rossi. And a man named Marco Rossi. Her life for the past 5 years. His financials, his associates, everything. I also need you to do something else. I need you to pull my personal phone records from 5 years ago. Specifically, the second week of June. I'm looking for an incoming text message from Elena's number. I need to know where it originated from. Where it really originated from. I'll get right on it, sir, Arthur said without a flicker of surprise in his voice. Is there anything else? Yes, Julian said, his gaze fixed on the hospital building. Everything. He stayed in the car for another hour, the engine of his life stalled. He was caught between two worlds, the cold, glittering cage he had built for himself and the warm, chaotic, terrifying reality that awaited him upstairs in a private hospital room. The man who had walked into that garage was not the same man who would walk out. Arthur was faster than he could have imagined. Less than 3 hours later, as Julian sat in the waiting area outside Elena's suite, his phone chimed with an encrypted email. The preliminary report. He opened it, his heart pounding a heavy, unfamiliar rhythm. The first part was grimly predictable. Marco Rossi was a small-time crook with big-time problems. He had a history of gambling, a string of failed businesses, and debts that were piling up with some very unsavory people. He had married Elena shortly after she had received a small inheritance from a deceased aunt. The inheritance was long gone and Marco was desperate. But it was the second part of the report that made the air leave Julian's lungs. Arthur had found the record of the breakup text. And it had not come from Elena's phone. Using sophisticated tracking software, he had traced its origin. It was a spoofed message sent from a burner phone via a routing service that bounced the signal off 3 different international towers to make it untraceable. A professional job. Someone had wanted to make absolutely certain he believed Elena had sent it. The final piece of the puzzle slid into place with a sickening click. Arthur had cross-referenced Vance's family accounts. During that same week, 5 years ago, a digital security firm known for its black ops work, corporate espionage, data deletion, digital impersonation, had received a substantial, untraceable payment from a discretionary trust fund. A fund that Julian had access to, but rarely touched. A fund that was managed day-to-day by his sister, Serafina. The world didn't just spin, it inverted. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate, calculated act of sabotage. Someone had stolen his life from him. And he had a very strong suspicion who it was. The fury that rose in him was cold and clear, a shard of ice in his chest. The first major twist wasn't just a twist. It was a declaration of war. Julian knew he couldn't walk back into Elena's room as the billionaire who had just uncovered a conspiracy. That man was a stranger to her now, a figure from a life she had been forced to leave behind. To have any chance of bridging the chasm of 5 years, he had to be the man she once knew. Or at least, a shadow of him. He left the hospital and went not to one of the high-end department stores his sister favored, but to a simple all-night drugstore. He bought diapers, formula, bottles, soft blankets, practical things. He bought a container of chicken soup from a nearby deli, the kind she used to love. It felt inadequate, a pathetic offering against the scale of the wrong that had been done, but it was a start. It was real. When he returned to her suite, he knocked softly. She called for him to enter, her voice small and tired. The room was dimly lit and she was sitting in a comfortable armchair by the window, one of the twins sleeping peacefully in her arms, the other in the bassinet beside her. The grand, impersonal luxury of the suite seemed to swallow her whole. He saw the single, small duffel bag on the floor by her bed, her entire life, packed up and discarded. He saw the worn-out sneakers peeking from under the chair. Her husband had not only abandoned her, he had left her with nothing. The sight of her, so vulnerable and yet so resilient, plunged a knife of guilt deep into his soul. His penthouse overlooked Central Park. His closets were filled with bespoke suits he had worn only once. He had spent more on his fiancée's engagement ring than Elena probably had to her name. The contrast was a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs and filling him with a burning, impotent rage at Serafina, at Marco, but most of all, at himself. For 5 years he had lived in gilded ignorance while she had struggled. "I brought you some things," he said quietly, setting the bags down. "And soup." Elena looked at the offerings, then back at him, her eyes wary. There was no gratitude in them, only a deep, guarded pain. "Why are you doing this, Julian? What do you want?" "I don't want anything," he said, the words feeling clumsy. I wanted to help." "Help?" She gave a short, bitter laugh. "A little late for that, don't you think? Where was all this help 5 years ago when you disappeared without a word?" He deserved that. He deserved every ounce of her anger. He didn't offer excuses or explanations. The time for that would come, but not now. Now he just needed to be present. "You're right," he said softly. "I'm sorry, Elena. For everything." An uneasy silence fell between them. The baby in her arms stirred, making a soft cooing sound. "He's hungry," she murmured, more to herself than to him. She made a move to get up, wincing slightly. "Let me," Julian said, the words out of his mouth before he could think. He moved forward, fumbling with the supplies he'd brought, preparing a bottle with an awkwardness that was almost comical for a man who could command a boardroom of sharks. His hands, which could sign documents worth nations, trembled as he tested the temperature of the formula on his wrist. He held the bottle out to her, but she just looked at him, then at the baby in her arms. "His name is Leo," she said quietly. "And she is Luna," she nodded toward the bassinet. After a moment's hesitation, she shifted the baby in her arms, offering him to Julian. You should do it." He took the tiny, warm bundle into his arms. The baby, his son, felt impossibly light, impossibly fragile. He was terrified he would break him. Leo rooted for the bottle, his tiny mouth closing around it. As the baby began to drink, a profound, primal connection arced between them. This small, perfect creature was a part of him. The cold, empty space in Julian's chest filled with a feeling so powerful, so overwhelming, it almost brought him to his knees. It was love. Unconditional and absolute. Elena watched them, her guard slowly, almost imperceptibly, lowering. The anger in her eyes was being replaced by a deep, heartbreaking sorrow. The man holding her son was a ghost, a memory, and yet he was undeniably real and undeniably the father of her children. As Julian held Leo, staring down at the tiny face so like his own, Elena spoke, her voice barely a whisper. The question was not one of anger, but of a weary, soul-deep confusion. "They have your eyes," she said, her gaze fixed on her son. "I saw it the moment they were born. I tried to tell myself it wasn't true, that it was just a coincidence." She looked up at him, her own eyes searching his. "I sent you so many letters, Julian. I called. They all went unanswered. I thought you just didn't want us." The fragile dam holding back his own emotions broke. The lie had to end. "Now." "Elena," he said, his voice thick with a pain that mirrored her own. "I never got any letters. I never got any calls." He looked at her, forcing himself to meet her gaze, to let her see the truth in his. "The only thing I got was a text message. A message that said you were leaving me for someone else." He saw the shock, the utter disbelief on her face. "I was a fool to believe it. But I did. And I have spent every day for 5 years regretting it." The silence that followed was different. It wasn't angry or awkward. It was the heavy-weighted silence of two people staring into the wreckage of a crime, realizing they were both victims. The bonding was no longer tentative, it was a shared, dawning horror. And in that shared horror, a fragile bridge began to form across the 5 years of lies that had separated them. Julian's carefully controlled world was hemorrhaging. While he was in the quiet bubble of the hospital room, discovering the son he never knew he had, the world outside was beginning to churn. Serafina was not a woman who accepted being ignored. She was a master strategist, and she treated every slight as a move on a chessboard. Julian's disappearance from the Vanderbilt dinner was not just a social faux pas, it was a challenge to her authority, and she reacted accordingly. Her first move was subtle, designed to control the narrative. By the next morning, a small, carefully worded item appeared in the city's most influential gossip column, penned by a journalist who owed Serafina more than one favor. It mentioned Julian Vance's admirable compassion, taking time away from his high-stakes merger to support a troubled childhood friend who had fallen on hard times. It was a masterpiece of misdirection, painting Julian as a saint while simultaneously diminishing Elena to a charity case, a footnote in his grand life. It was a warning shot. Her second move was more direct. A courier arrived at the hospital, delivering a sleek, expensive envelope addressed to Elena Rossi. Inside was a cashier's check for $250,000 and a one-page agreement, drafted by the Vance family's top lawyer. It offered Elena a new, furnished apartment, a monthly stipend, and complete silence. In exchange, she was to relinquish any and all claims, formally or informally, and relocate to a city of their choosing on the West Coast. It was not a settlement, it was a banishment. Elena showed it to Julian, her hands trembling with fury. "She thinks she can buy my children," she whispered, tearing the check in half. This was the proof Julian needed. Serafina knew. She knew about the children, and she was already trying to bury them. The cold fury in his chest solidified into a diamond-hard resolve. He called Arthur. "Dig deeper," he ordered. "I want to know every move Serafina has made for the past 5 years. Every transfer, every private meeting. I want the schematics to the prison she built around us." While Arthur's digital ghosts went to work, Julian realized he needed an ally in the physical world, someone whose loyalty wasn't to the Vance name or its fortune. He found one in an unexpected place. Mrs. Gable, the hospital's senior social worker, was a woman in her late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She had been assigned to Elena's case after Marco's public abandonment and had taken an immediate, fierce, and protective interest in the young mother and her twins. Julian requested a meeting with her in a private conference room. He didn't try to use his name or his money to intimidate her. He laid out a version of the truth, that he and Elena had a past, that there had been a terrible misunderstanding, and that powerful forces were now trying to separate a mother from her children. He didn't name Serafina, not yet. Mrs. Gable listened, her expression unreadable. When he was finished, she looked him straight in the eye. "Mr. Vance, I have seen men like you my entire career. You move worlds to get what you want, and you crush anyone who gets in your way. Elena is a good person who has been through hell. Are you here to help her, or are you just another storm she has to survive?" "I'm here to fix what I broke," Julian said, his voice raw with sincerity. "But I can't do it alone. She needs protection. Legal counsel. A safe place to go when she leaves this hospital. I can provide the resources, but I need someone she can trust, someone who will advocate for her and her children above all else." He slid a folder across the table. It wasn't a bribe. It was a proposal to establish a new, fully funded foundation administered by Mrs. Gable herself, dedicated to providing legal and financial aid to single mothers in crisis. "Fund the whole department for a decade," he said. "Starting with Elena." Mrs. Gable studied him for a long, silent moment. She saw past the billionaire CEO to the desperate father underneath. She saw the truth of his pain. She slid the folder back. "I don't need a foundation to do my job, Mr. Vance. But I will accept your help for Elena. On one condition. Every decision regarding her and those babies goes through me first. You will be transparent. And if I sense for 1 second that you are not acting in their best interest, I will personally burn you to the ground." Julian had never been spoken to like that in his adult life. He had never respected someone more. "Agreed," he said, shaking her hand. A crucial alliance was forged. The need for that alliance became terrifyingly clear less than 24 hours later. Arthur's deep dive had unearthed the conspiracy's rotten core. He found the financial records, a monthly retainer paid from Serafina's trust to Marco Rossi, starting almost 2 years ago. Serafina hadn't just found Marco, she had cultivated him. She had paid off his gambling debts, setting him up as the perfect pawn to marry Elena and keep her away from Julian's world. The marriage was a sham from the start, orchestrated by his sister. But Serafina was not a woman to leave a weapon unused. As soon as her spies at the hospital confirmed Julian was not just visiting, but staying, bonding with the children, she escalated her attack with brutal precision. She tracked down the pathetic, debt-ridden Marco. Using the threat of his loan sharks and the promise of a final, massive payday, she forced him to play his final, devastating card. A uniformed court process server arrived at Elena's private suite. Mrs. Gable was there, going over discharge papers with Elena. Julian was holding Luna, rocking her gently. The server handed a thick envelope to a stunned Elena. Her face went ashen as she read the documents inside. Her hands began to shake so violently she dropped the papers. Julian gently placed the sleeping baby in her bassinet and picked up the documents. It was an emergency custody petition, filed by Marco Rossi. It claimed he was the biological father of the twins and that Elena Rossi was an unfit, mentally unstable mother, citing her delusional claims about a past relationship with a prominent billionaire. It demanded immediate, sole custody of Leo and Luna Rossi. The stakes had just been raised from a personal tragedy to a legal war. Serafina was no longer just trying to hide the children, she was trying to take them. This was not a warning shot anymore. It was a kill shot aimed directly at Elena's heart, and Julian knew with chilling certainty that his sister would not miss. The cold fury that had been simmering inside Julian finally ignited into a white-hot inferno. The custody papers were not just a legal document, they were a declaration of war from his own sister, using the lives of his children as ammunition. He held the pages in his hand, the flimsy paper feeling as heavy as a slab of granite, each word a testament to Serafina's bottomless cruelty. He looked at Elena, who was staring blankly at the wall, her face a mask of numb horror. Mrs. Gable was at her side, speaking in low, comforting tones, but the blow had clearly landed. This was Serafina's true power, not just manipulation but the systematic destruction of a person's hope. Julian laid the papers down. "Arthur," he said into his phone, his voice dangerously calm. "Send me everything you have. The final file." Now a moment later, his tablet chimed. He turned to Mrs. Gable. "Keep her safe. Don't let her out of your sight. I'll be back." He didn't take his car. He took one of the hospital's service elevators down to the street and hailed a yellow cab, a vessel of anonymity in a city where his face was a brand. He directed the driver to Vance Tower, the gleaming monument to his family's power, the place he had once called the center of his universe. Now, it felt like the heart of a rot he had to carve out. He bypassed the main lobby, using his private security access to enter through a subterranean entrance. He rode his personal elevator directly to the top floor, to Serafina's office. It was a mirror of his own, but where his was minimalist and stark, hers was opulent, filled with antique furniture and priceless art, a throne room for a modern-day queen. She was on the phone, her back to the door, looking out over the city she believed she owned. "The arrangements for the gala are to be perfect," she was saying, her voice crisp. "The Philanthropist of the Year award needs to be the centerpiece of the evening news." Julian strode across the plush carpet, the tablet held tight in his hand. He walked to her vast, mahogany desk and, with a sweep of his arm, cleared a space, sending a priceless Ming vase crashing to the floor. Serafina spun around, her face a mask of shock and outrage. "Julian, what's the meaning of this?" He didn't say a word. He simply turned the tablet screen toward her. On it, displayed in cold, hard data, was her entire conspiracy. Bank statements showing the wire transfers from her trust to the digital security firm. Geotagged data proving the burner phone that sent the breakup text was purchased 2 blocks from her apartment. The monthly payments to Marco Rossi. The meticulously crafted lies, all laid bare. He watched her face as she processed the information. The shock melted away, replaced by a chillingly familiar look of defiance. The corner of her mouth tightened. She did not crumble. She did not deny it. She straightened her spine, a queen caught in a coup but refusing to surrender her crown. "It was you," Julian said, his voice low and shaking with a controlled rage. "All of it. You didn't just let us break up. You orchestrated it. You hired a firm to impersonate her. You paid that parasite Marco to marry her, to keep her buried. You destroyed my life. You destroyed her life." Serafina let out a short, sharp breath, almost a laugh. "Your life," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I saved your life. I saved this family. You were a boy, besotted with a waitress from Queens. You were writing her poetry and talking about leaving the company. Leaving your legacy. Father had just died and you were ready to throw everything away for her." She paced around the desk, her movements predatory and graceful. "I did what was necessary. That girl was a weed in the garden we have spent a century cultivating. I simply pulled her out. The life you have now, the power, the respect, the alliance with the Vanderbilts, I gave you all of that. Beatrice is a partner worthy of our name. Not some penniless nobody who shows up 5 years later with your offspring." She said the last word as if it were a contagion. Her complete lack of remorse, her absolute conviction that her cruelty was justified, was the final, clarifying moment for Julian. He looked at the woman he had called his sister, the person he had trusted above all others, and he saw a stranger. A monster dressed in couture. You're wrong, he said, and the quiet certainty in his voice silenced her tirade. You talk about legacy. You talk about gardens and weeds. For 5 years I have lived in the sterile, empty world you created for me, and I was suffocating. My legacy isn't this company. It's not our name on buildings. He took a step closer, his eyes boring into hers. It's them. My son. My daughter. That is the only legacy that matters. This was the line. The final, uncrossable boundary between his past and his future. He pulled out his phone. His first call was to the chairman of the board of Vance Industries. Walter, he said, his voice firm. I'm calling an emergency meeting of the full board for tomorrow morning. There's going to be a change in leadership. He disconnected before Walter could respond. His second call was to Beatrice Vanderbilt. She answered on the first ring. Julian, darling. Your sister said you were handling a charity case. Beatrice. He cut her off, his tone leaving no room for argument. The engagement is over. The merger is off. I'm sorry for the public difficulty this will cause, but it is final. He hung up, the severing of the tie a clean, decisive cut. He had just burned down his entire life, and he had never felt so free. He turned back to Serafina, who was staring at him, her face finally showing a flicker of disbelief, of panic. She had lost control. You are out, he said, his voice as cold as steel. Of the company, of this family, of my life. You will be hearing from my lawyers. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the ruins of her grand design. He went straight back to the hospital, his purpose clear. He found Elena in her room, Mrs. Gable sitting quietly with her. The fighting spirit had returned to Elena's eyes, the initial shock replaced by a fierce, maternal resolve. Julian knelt before her, taking her hands in his. They were cold. Elena, he began, and for the first time he told her everything. He laid out the entire conspiracy, showing her the proof on his tablet of Serafina's deep, calculated treachery, of the paid-off husband, of the stolen years. He watched her absorb the full scope of the betrayal, saw the pain and anger flicker across her face. When he was done, he didn't let go of her hands. She did this to us, Elena, he said, his voice thick with emotion. She stole 5 years. And now she is trying to steal our children. I will not let that happen. The woman you knew 5 years ago, the monster she has become. They are two different people. I swear to you, I will fight for you. For them. I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but please, he pleaded, his gaze locked on hers, let me be their father. Trust me this one last time. Elena looked from his face to her sleeping babies and back again. The years of pain and distrust warred with the undeniable truth in his eyes. She saw the man she had once loved resurrected from the ashes of a life he was now desperately trying to escape. After a long, heart-wrenching silence, she gave a single, determined nod. Okay, Julian, she whispered. We fight them. Together, in that moment, the battle lines were drawn and a new, forged-in-fire alliance was sealed. The annual Vance Foundation Charity Gala was the crown jewel of New York's high society calendar. It was Serafina's masterpiece, a night where she laundered the family's ruthless corporate reputation through a fire hose of champagne and performative philanthropy. This year was to be her apotheosis. She had personally arranged to be the recipient of the Philanthropist of the Year award, a final, glittering testament to her control over the city's narrative. Even with Julian's threats, she felt secure. The gala was her home turf, the custody battle was her checkmate, and she believed, to her core, that her brother would never risk public humiliation. She had underestimated the man he had become. Julian arrived not through the star-studded front entrance, but through a service corridor, accompanied by Arthur, Mrs. Gable, and a small, discreet security team. Elena was with them, her nervousness masked by a steely resolve. The twins, Leo and Luna, were safely ensconced in carriers, sleeping soundly, oblivious to the storm they were about to enter. They waited in a small green room just off the main stage, a quiet pocket in the heart of the hurricane. On stage, the master of ceremonies was lavishing praise on Serafina. A woman whose tireless dedication and visionary leadership have redefined what it means to give back. It is my immense honor to present the Philanthropist of the Year award to the heart and soul of the Vance Foundation, Miss Serafina Vance. The ballroom, filled with 1,000 of the world's most powerful people, erupted in applause. Serafina ascended the stage, a vision in shimmering silver, a triumphant smile gracing her lips. She accepted the heavy crystal award, her moment of ultimate victory at hand. And now, the MC continued, a few words from the man who knows her best, her brother and the CEO of Vance Industries, Mr. Julian Vance. That was Julian's cue. He walked onto the stage from the opposite wing, his face projected onto the massive screens flanking the stage. He looked calm, dressed in a simple, dark suit that stood in stark contrast to Serafina's opulence. He shook the MC's hand, took the podium, and looked out at the glittering assembly. He saw Beatrice Vanderbilt and her father in the front row, their faces tight with anticipation. "Thank you," Julian began, his voice clear and steady, carrying to every corner of the vast room. "My sister, Serafina, is indeed a visionary. She sees the world as a chessboard and has an incredible capacity for long-term strategic planning. She is willing to make sacrifices or to sacrifice others to achieve her goals." A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Serafina's smile faltered. This was not the speech they had prepared. "Tonight, we celebrate philanthropy," Julian continued, his voice hardening. "The love of humanity. But sometimes what is presented as love is merely a mask for the most profound cruelty. For 5 years, my sister has been the architect of a lie that has cost innocent people their lives as they knew them." He gestured to the main screen behind him. As if on cue, Arthur, from a control booth at the back of the room, began the presentation. The screen, which moments before had shown Serafina's smiling face, now displayed a bank statement, a wire transfer from her private trust to a digital security firm. Then, a side-by-side comparison of Elena's real phone records and the spoofed text message. Then, the contracts and payment schedules for Marco Rossi. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. "My sister did not want me to be with the woman I loved," Julian stated, his voice ringing with the force of truth. "So she had her erased from my life. And she paid a man to keep her hidden." He paused, then turned to the side of the stage. "But you can't erase people. You can only hurt them," he extended his hand. Elena walked onto the stage, her simple dress a beacon of authenticity in a sea of sequins. She stood beside him, proud and unbowed. The cameras flashed, a frenzy of activity capturing the unbelievable scene. Serafina's face was a horrifying canvas of rage and panic. "He's lying," she shrieked into the microphone. "This is slander. This woman is an extortionist." "Is she?" Julian's voice cut through her hysteria. "There's one more part of the story." Arthur walked onto the stage, handing Julian a single file. Julian opened it. "My sister's strategy was thorough. She didn't just want to separate us. She wanted to isolate the woman I loved completely. To make her vulnerable," he looked directly at Serafina. "Years before we even broke up, when you first learned of our relationship, you used the family's legal team to launch a series of anonymous, targeted audits against her father's small construction business. You drove him into bankruptcy. You destroyed her entire family's foundation just in case you ever needed her to fall. This was the final, shocking reveal. Not just a crime of passion or jealousy, but a cold, premeditated campaign of destruction against an innocent family. It was a truth so monstrous it silenced the entire room. The exposure was absolute. Serafina stared, speechless, her mask of civility finally shattered, revealing the ugliness beneath. Her public image, the thing she had prized above all else, was incinerated before her eyes. As the weight of the revelation settled, a new group of figures emerged from the wings. Not hotel security, but federal agents, their badges gleaming under the stage lights. Julian's lawyers had delivered the entire file to the U.S. Attorney's Office that afternoon. The charges were extensive: wire fraud, conspiracy, witness tampering. Serafina Vance, the lead agent, said, his voice amplified by the still-live microphone. "You are under arrest." They cuffed her right there on the stage, in her shimmering gown, the heavy crystal award for Philanthropist of the Year lying forgotten at her feet. Her downfall was public, spectacular, and complete. Across the room, the Vanderbilts were already slipping out a side door, their dynastic ambitions turned to dust. Amid the chaos of flashing cameras and shouting journalists, Julian turned his back on the wreckage of his former life. He walked to Elena, ignoring everyone else in the room. He gently touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a single tear. Mrs. Gable appeared, holding the carriers with the twins. Julian took one, Elena took the other. They stood together, a family, united for the first time in the blinding glare of the public eye. A photographer captured the image. The redeemed tycoon, the wronged mother, and their 2 children, their future born from the ashes of a spectacular lie. "It's over," Julian whispered to Elena, and in that moment he knew his new life had truly begun. 1 year later, the world looked different. The air no longer smelled of rarefied glass and steel, but of freshly cut grass and blooming hydrangeas. Julian was not in a penthouse, he was on his hands and knees on a sprawling lawn that sloped down to a gentle, sun-dappled lake. His opponents were formidable, two giggling, wobbling one-year-olds who were determined to crawl in opposite directions. Leo, no, not the sprinklers, Julian laughed, scooping up his son just before he reached the spray zone. A moment later, he had to lunge for his daughter. Luna, come back here, you little adventurer. He was wearing faded jeans and a soft, worn t-shirt. The haunted, empty look in his eyes was gone, replaced by a light he hadn't possessed in years. The cold, calculating CEO had vanished, and in his place was a relaxed, happy, and utterly devoted father. He had dismantled his old life as thoroughly as he had dismantled his sister's conspiracy. He had stepped down as CEO of Vance Industries, retaining a controlling interest but installing a new board and a new mandate for ethical practices. The infamous Vance Foundation had been dissolved. In its place was the Next Generation Fund, a powerful legal aid and support network for families wronged by the wealthy and powerful. It was administered by a board of seasoned advocates, chaired by the unflappable Mrs. Gable. It was his penance and his purpose, using the vast resources that had once caused so much harm to now create healing. Elena emerged from the comfortable, sun-filled house that was now their home. It was beautiful but not ostentatious, a place for living, not for display. She carried a tray with a pitcher of lemonade and 2 glasses, her smile easy and bright. She had enrolled in online courses to finish the design degree she had abandoned years ago, her talent, once suppressed, now flourishing. She set the tray down on a small wooden table and watched as Julian wrestled playfully with the twins on the grass. They were a family. Not a perfect, storybook family, but a real one, forged in crisis and bonded by a love that had refused to die. Julian looked up and saw her watching, his heart swelling with a gratitude so profound it almost hurt. This was it. This was the success he had been chasing his whole life without ever knowing what it looked like. He walked over to her, his bare feet cool on the grass. He took her hand. "Remember that street vendor where I bought you the locket?" he asked softly. She smiled. "The one who told you it was magic?" "Of course I remember. I went back and found him," Julian said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple box. It wasn't velvet. It was hand-carved wood. Inside was not a massive diamond meant to signal a merger, but a simple, elegant platinum band with a single, perfect sapphire the color of a twilight sky. He said this one was for second chances. He knelt before her, right there on the lawn, as their children babbled happily nearby. "Elena Rossi, you are the strongest, most incredible person I have ever known. You were my home then, and you're my home now. Will you do me the honor of being my wife for real this time?" Tears of joy streamed down her face as she nodded, unable to speak. "Yes," she finally whispered. "Yes, Julian. Always." He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. He stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and regret and hope of the years they had lost and the lifetime they now had to gain. As he held her, with their children playing at their feet, a final, profound thought settled in his mind. For years, he had been told his legacy was a name carved on a skyscraper, a number on a balance sheet. He had chased power and prestige, believing that was the measure of a man. He finally understood. True legacy wasn't something you built. It was something you held. It wasn't in a boardroom. It was right here, warm and real, in his arms.